Okay, fam, gather round. I need to tell you a story that sounds so fake, so incredibly stupid, that you're gonna think I'm making it up for clicks. But I swear on my subscriber count, this is 100% real history. We all know the moon, right? That big shiny rock in the sky. Tides, romance, werewolves, Neil Armstrong taking a small step. All that wholesome stuff. But did you know that back in the 1950s, the United States government looked at that beautiful, peaceful satellite and thought, you know what would look really cool if we blew it up? I'm not joking. Before we planted a flag on the moon, we seriously planned to plant a nuclear bomb on it. Why? Was there an alien invasion? Were there space Nazis hiding on the dark side? Did the moon owe us money? No. The reason is actually way dumber than that. We wanted to nuke the moon, just to show off. It was the ultimate hold my beer moment in human history. The US Air Force literally sat in a room and said, hey, let's nuke the moon so the Russians feel bad about themselves. This is the story of Project A119. The secret plan that proves humanity is smart enough to split the atom, but dumb enough to use it for a fireworks display. Buckle up, because this is gonna get messy. To understand why anyone would think nuking a celestial body is a good idea, we have to travel back to the late 1950s. The vibe was toxic. It was the height of the Cold War. The USA and the Soviet Union were like two high school jocks flexing in the locker room, measuring who had the bigger missiles. For years, America thought it was the main character. We had the best economy, the best cars, and we had the bomb. We were chilling. But then, on October 4th, 1957, the Soviets pulled a fast one. They launched Sputnik 1. It was just a tiny metal ball, honestly. It did nothing except beep, beep, beep. But that beeping sound drove America absolutely insane. You have to understand, the American public lost their minds. They looked up at the sky and thought, oh my God, the commies are above us. They have the high ground. Next week, they're gonna drop vodka bottles and propaganda leaflets on our heads. The US government panicked, like full-on meltdown mode. Their ego was bruised. They felt cringe. They had been ghosted by success. The media was roasting them. The citizens were terrified. The Pentagon realized they needed a win, and they needed it fast. They couldn't wait for NASA to invent safe rockets or spacesuits. That takes too long. They needed a PR stunt, a viral moment, something so loud, so bright, and so terrifying that the Soviets would look at it and say, okay, you win. Please don't hurt us. And that is when some genius in the Air Force looked out the window, saw the moon, and whispered, target acquired. So, in 1958, the Air Force quietly assembled a team. They didn't call it Project Nuke the Moon, because that sounds like a supervillain plot. Instead, they gave it the most boring, corporate name imaginable, a study of lunar research flights. Snore. Sounds like a high school science fair project, right? But the research they were studying was basically, how big of a boom can we make? They gathered a squad of top-tier scientists at the Armor Research Foundation in Chicago. Leading the pack was a physicist named Leonard Rifle. Smart guy. But here is where the story gets spicy. Guess who else was on the team? Go on, guess. It was a young, nerdy doctoral student named Carl Sagan. Yes, that Carl Sagan. The pale blue dot guy. The cosmos guy. The man who spent his whole life preaching about peace, love, and the beauty of the universe. Before he was the poster boy for wholesome science, young Carl was sitting in a classified room, crunching numbers on how a nuclear explosion would expand in low gravity. Talk about a dark past, right? It's like finding out Bob Ross used to be a drill sergeant. Oh wait, he actually was. But you get my point. The team had one main objective. It wasn't science. It wasn't exploration. The objective was visibility. They didn't just want to blow up a crater. They wanted a show. They wanted an explosion so massive, so bright, that people on Earth could see it with their naked eyes. Imagine stepping out on your porch in Kansas, sipping your coffee, looking up at the moon, and seeing a mushroom cloud blooming on the surface. That was the goal. They wanted to turn the moon into a billboard for American military power. They debated using a hydrogen bomb, H-bomb. You know, the really big ones. But the scientists did the math and said, guys, H-bombs are heavy. Our rockets are kinda trash right now. If we try to launch an H-bomb, it might not make it to the moon. It might just fall back on Florida. So, they decided to settle for a smaller atomic bomb. Something similar to the Fat Man bomb dropped on Nagasaki. Still plenty destructive, but light enough to strap onto a missile. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of this nightmare. How exactly do you nuke a rock that is 238,000 miles away? First, you have to aim. The scientists decided they shouldn't just hit the center of the moon. That's too basic. They wanted to hit the Terminator line. No, not the Arnold Schwarzenegger robot. The Terminator line is the border between the light side and the dark side of the moon. Why there? Because of the lighting, obviously. It's all about the aesthetics. If they detonated the nuke on the dark side, right at the edge, the sun would illuminate the giant cloud of radioactive dust from behind. It would make the cloud glow like a neon sign against the black sky. It was literally designed to be the ultimate Instagram story, decades before Instagram existed. Carl Sagan's job was to calculate the expansion of the dust cloud. He figured out that since the moon has no atmosphere, there wouldn't be a classic mushroom cloud like on Earth. Without air resistance, the explosion would look more like a giant, expanding bubble of doom. But Sagan, being the nerd he was, also tried to justify it with science. He suggested that the explosion might crack open the lunar crust and help us study the moon's geology. Yeah, right, Carl. That's like throwing a brick through your neighbor's window and saying you wanted to study the ventilation. We know what you were doing. The plan was set for a launch in 1959. The missile would fly for about 2 days. It would impact the moon. Boom! And the Soviets would cry in their vodka. Perfect plan. What could possibly go wrong? Now, here is the plot twist. America wasn't the only one having crazy thoughts. Turns out, the Soviet Union had the exact same idea. Because of course they did. They had a secret project called Project E4. Their plan? You guessed it. Nuke the moon. It's actually hilarious if you think about it. Imagine two neighbors who hate each other. One neighbor buys a chainsaw to cut down the other guy's tree. The other neighbor buys a bigger chainsaw to cut down the same tree. Meanwhile, the tree is just chilling there, minding its own business, wondering why everyone hates it. The Soviets wanted to time their explosion to coincide with a lunar eclipse, so that everyone looking at the eclipse would suddenly see a flash. It was petty. It was childish. It was incredibly dangerous. It was the peak of Cold War stupidity. Both superpowers were racing to see who could vandalize the solar system first. But then, something happened. The scientists, the generals, and the politicians started to have a strange sensation. A feeling they hadn't felt in a long time. Common sense. So, why didn't it happen? Why are we not looking at a radioactive crater right now? Well, Leonard Riefel and the top brass started to run the risk assessment. And the list of cons started to get way longer than the list of pros. Risk number 1, the launch. Rockets in the 1950s were, how do I say this politely? They were garbage. They blew up on the launch pad all the time. Imagine putting a live nuclear warhead on top of a rocket that has a 50-50 chance of exploding immediately. If the rocket failed during liftoff, it wouldn't nuke the moon. It would nuke Florida. And generally speaking, nuking your own taxpayers is bad for re-election. Risk number 2, the fallout. Scientists started to realize that if they scattered radioactive dust all over the moon, it would ruin the moon forever. If we ever wanted to send astronauts there later, which we did, they would be landing in a toxic wasteland. It would be like trying to have a picnic in Chernobyl. Carl Sagan, presumably waking up from his fever dream, pointed out that if we wanted to find life on the moon, nuking it is probably the worst way to start. Hi aliens, here is some plutonium. Welcome to the neighborhood. Risk number 3, the vibe check. This was the biggest one. The Air Force started to wonder, how would the public actually react? They thought people would be impressed, but then they realized people might just be terrified. Nuking the moon doesn't make you look like a hero. It makes you look like a psychopath. If the US blew up a chunk of the moon, the rest of the world wouldn't say, "Wow, America is cool." They would say, "Yo, you guys are crazy. Please stay away from us." It would be a PR disaster. It would turn the US into the intergalactic bully. So, in January 1959, the Air Force quietly pulled the plug. Project A119 was buried in the archives. Files were stamped top secret and thrown into a dark basement. The Soviets canceled their project too, probably for the same reasons. The moon was safe. For decades, this whole thing was just a rumor, a conspiracy theory. People would whisper, "Hey, did you hear the government wanted to blow up the moon?" And everyone would laugh and say, "Put your tinfoil hat back on, weirdo." But then, in the 1990s, Carl Sagan was writing a biography. And maybe he wanted to clear his conscience, or maybe he just wanted to flex. But he mentioned his involvement in the classified project. Then, in the year 2000, Leonard Rifle, the boss of the project, came out and spilled the tea. He confirmed everything: the bomb, the math, the motivation. He told the press, "I was horrified that such a gesture to sway public opinion was ever considered." Yeah, Leonard, we are all horrified. When the news broke, the world was like, "Wait, what?" It's crazy to think about how close we came. One signature from a general, one button press, and our night sky would look completely different today. We wouldn't have the peaceful, one small step for man. We would have a glowing radioactive scar reminding us of our own stupidity. So, what did we learn today, class? We learned that insecurity makes people do crazy things. We learned that even smart scientists can come up with dumb ideas if you pay them enough. And we learned that we are very, very lucky that the moon is still in one piece. Project A119 is a reminder that science without wisdom is dangerous. It's funny to laugh about it now. Haha, nuke the moon. But it shows how fragile our history really is. We chose to go to the moon in peace, mostly, instead of blowing it up. And I think that was the right call. Although, I gotta admit, part of my lizard brain is slightly curious about what that explosion would have looked like. Just a little bit. Anyway, next time you look up at the moon, give it a little wink. Tell it, "You're welcome." Because we almost ghosted it from existence. If you liked this deep dive into the madness of the Cold War, smash that like button harder than an atomic bomb hitting a crater. Subscribe to Strange But True, because I have way more secrets to tell you. Let me know in the comments. If we had nuked the moon, what would we have called the crater? I'm voting for Lake Oopsie. Stay weird, stay safe, and please, don't nuke anything. Peace out.